Recognized member for Esquimalt, Machosen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking First Peoples, in particular the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And today I'd like to speak about First Nations culture, preservation and celebration. And I'd like to talk about the relationship between the land and the importance of First Nations language, and the need to retain traditional language and oral traditions as well. In my constituency, Madam Speaker, and throughout the whole of British Columbia, First Nations are making connections between culture and land. Their identity, nationhood, and cultural survival are all interconnected to their relationship with the land. Since time immemorial, First Nations have had an intricate, respectful, spiritually and physically dependent, grateful, and stewardship tie to the land. The nature of this tie is not so much one of ownership, it's one of guardianship and leadership. They believe they've been bestowed with responsibility for the land and sea and air, and all of the creatures that inhabit the land with them. This sense of responsibility is greater than an emotional tie. It is intrinsically tied to the spirits of all aspects of the earth. This inexorable connection is celebrated in oral histories, creation stories, ceremonies, and cultural practices. The stories and practices are passed down to individuals within a family for many reasons, one being to protect the ancestral and cultural connection to the land. Many First Nations elders, like Shirley Alphonse of the Sauk Nation, are leading the way with teaching younger generations about traditional ways. So, for example, through the leadership and commitment of School District 62, language programs for kindergarten children have been thriving for over 6 years. The elder, Shirley, for example, teaches kindergarten in Sauk. She helps the children learn the Senchothan language, which is spoken across many South Vancouver Island Coast Salish peoples. She has taught hundreds of children over the years and has offered special programs in the community. For example, to a non-profit daycare group for young parents in Belmont High School. And as Elder Shirley says, it is for our future. Shirley and so many others are passing along the traditional knowledge, the cultural practices, and oral traditions built up over the millennia. They tell stories of a rich, vibrant history. The Coast Salish peoples lived together in longhouses. They settled in villages of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. They traveled the territory to fish and hunt and gather a bountiful variety of foods. Maps record more than 500 Homonym place names blanketing the landscape. However, many of those names have been obliterated from common usage. But those place names aren't the only loss. British Columbia is rich with a great diversity of First Nations languages. Our province is home to 60% of First Nations languages in Canada, with 34 unique languages and 61 dialects. From a global perspective, BC is known as a linguistic hotspot because of this diversity and the vitality of First Nation languages here. However, most of these languages are critically endangered, and we must do more to preserve and value oral histories of First Peoples. Language is the way a culture is transmitted. It represents the identity of a people and holds cultural, historical, scientific, and ecological knowledge. When a language is lost, we all lose out on the knowledge held within it and the unique way that its speakers view the world. Language reflects values and relationships, perspectives and history. And the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states that Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems and literatures, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places, and persons. Initiatives such as First Voices are working to preserve and celebrate First Nations languages. It is an intentionally recognized online Indigenous language archiving and teaching resource, and it allows Indigenous communities to document their language for future generations. First Voices provides state-of-the-art technologies, training, and technical support to community language champions. Teams of fluent elders and technically savvy youth upload dictionaries and alphabets and songs and stories and words and phrases, as well as audio and video to these community archives. It's part of the work of the First Peoples Cultural Council. The Council supports the revitalisation of Aboriginal language, arts and culture in British Columbia. And another council project is the First Peoples Language Map of British Columbia that actually provides access to a list of First Nations in BC and information about them, including what language they speak and where they're located. These are really important and vital initiatives that are making a difference. And it actually can help British Columbians understand the nature of the relationship between oral histories and language and the value and richness of language and the connection between that language and those oral traditions and histories and the relationship with the land and the air and the sea and how First Nations peoples are our stewards on behalf of the British Columbian province in taking that forward. So thank you so much, Madam Speaker. These are really important initiatives that make such a difference.
Thank you, Member.